Former Conservative MP Kenny Chiu and former Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole testifying today at the National Inquiry into Foreign Elections Interference. As you heard there, Erin O'Toole believes foreign meddling swung seats away from his party in the 2021 election, something the Prime Minister rejects.
I can understand where someone who lost an election is trying to look for reasons other than themselves why they might have lost an election. The outcome of those elections were decided by Canadians, not by anybody else. Unfortunately, the Conservatives continue to try and play partisan games with the facts and the issues before us that are very, very seriously.
And Erin O'Toole is the former leader of the Conservative Party. Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I appreciate you making the time for the conversation. I thought one thing that stuck out to me from your testimony today was that you were shown documents from kind of the two groups that were charged in the last election with figuring out if the election was conducted with integrity and was okay, essentially. And that one of those documents talked about the Chinese Communist Party and their efforts to, quote, information operation that aims to discourage voters from voting for the Conservative Party of Canada. You said you weren't shown that.
No, and in fact, we were kind of led to believe that everything was fine, everything was under control, and we were seeing totally different situation on the ground. And it was clear to us that we weren't ready for the level of interference and misinformation, and it was a bit disappointing just in the last 2 days for me to see these documents for the first time.
Was it your impression, based on what you saw on the ground, that there was something coordinated happening?
Yes. Not only was that my impression on the ground, I'm very careful not to speak about my CSIS briefing, but certain elements have shown that there was a degree of coordination here that was intended to misinform people, mislead them with respect to me and the party, but also to set a tone that led to, I think, voter suppression. And just people didn't want to vote. If they didn't want their name on a voters list and the Conservatives won, there was a real push to in a number of seats, not enough to change the outcome, but I've always said every vote counts, and on election day we have 338 little elections, and whatever party has the most seats in the House of Commons forms government. That's how our system works, first past the post. So I think we weren't ready last time, and that's why I'm out of politics now, but I want to make sure this inquiry has the opportunity to do its work to make some strong recommendations for next time.
And before we get to the prospects for this being avoided next time, I guess I wanted to better ascertain what specific information you were given at an official level. So you observe stuff that's happening on the ground. My understanding is you convey that to, again, the two committees, or one group, one committee that have been struck to deal with the integrity of the election. Is anything official passed back to you?
No, and in fact, I received no briefing ahead of the election. I designated two people, Walid Solomon and Tasha Michaud, my chief of staff, to be kind of my designates for the ongoing meetings throughout the campaign. But right off the start, they were given the impression that there were no significant problems in 2019, and we're not anticipating any foreign interference problems in 2021. It's really just been the reporting that has come out in the last year, really, that shows, yes, there were problems in 2019 in terms of some candidates being funded and manipulation of nomination races by Beijing. And so that should have been how the 21 election started, was here's what happened in 2019, and here are our measures that we're taking to prevent this foreign interference in the next election. There was none of that. So we felt that even our concerns were just not being taken seriously, and that's why I've always said we need a nonpartisan professional inquiry, and I think Madam Justice Hogue is trying to do that.
Did you have the impression, because when we've asked those questions since that reporting primarily from the Globe and Mail began, of government officials, for example, even bureaucrats, about why there wasn't an alarm sounded or anything was made public or something more formal was conveyed to Canadians, they basically have articulated that they didn't feel it met a certain bar. Do you sort of, I guess, agree with that sentiment, or do you feel, is that what's being conveyed to you? I'm just trying to figure out why we haven't heard about this until now.
I think they made a miscalculation to say, as long as the final result, as long as there wasn't every riding affected, it was a free and fair election. But I've said we should look at it from the opposite point of view. If there's a small group of people in just a handful of ridings that are impacted by foreign interference, that means those ridings were not free and fair. The degree and how many people didn't vote, all these sorts of things are just speculation. It's really hard to determine. But to suggest that there was no problem because the overall outcome was fine, I don't think is the responsible way to approach this. We've got to make sure that every vote, every riding counts, and the more we can mitigate and fight against misinformation and interference, that should be the focus, and this should be nonpartisan, and we should try and get the best measures in the world, because I think this isn't going away in the future. There could be several more countries looking to have an impact than even 2021.
Would you have done anything differently? I heard you today reflect on the thoughts that you had at the time to convey, to say something basically about what you had observed going on, and you didn't.
Yeah, can I have a do-over? This is something when, we lost the election, and I was constantly saying, what should we have done better? There were challenges. The one thing, if I'd known there was going to be that degree of misinformation, largely on the WeChat, the Chinese-controlled social media platforms, I probably would have staffed up our response and our own monitoring, and made sure we had people with Cantonese and Mandarin rapid response. The messaging that you do on the campaign bus and the campaign plane to regular media like yourself, we needed to prepare almost to that degree or more for this social media battle, and we just were not there. We didn't have the capacity, we didn't have the understanding of these sites, and when we did try and respond to correct the message, the misleading message against me, the algorithm, which is controlled in China, would downplay our message and upplay misinformation. So I don't even think we truly understand how some of these platforms affect our democracy. You
also talked, and you've mentioned today, you agree with the assessment it didn't impact the overall outcome of the election. You did say today between 6 and 9 ridings your party has analyzed were lost because of interference. Can you be sure of that?
This is what I've always said. I believe it's in that range, and that's based on two things: reports of misinformation and interference in a handful of seats in the Vancouver region and the Greater Toronto area, and our modeling, which our modeling was pretty bang on the rest of the country, but very out of whack in a number of seats. And we looked at those seats, and they were high seats with Chinese Canadian voting populations. So we knew some of the issues we saw, including stores that had signs about me and things like this. We knew they were having an impact. It was hard to assess how much. The modeling is what I've used, but I've always been careful to say it wouldn't have changed the outcome. This is why I never spoke about this, Vassy, as Conservative leader. I never raised this publicly. I believe in our institutions so much. And in COVID, a lot of people stopped believing institutions and were believing things on social media. And so I was very careful to never suggest that our election wasn't a fair one. We just have to make sure that this interference is mitigated next time so that it's fair for every single voter.
Today the Prime Minister was asked about your assessment and that modeling that you referenced, and in part he responded by saying, I can understand where someone who lost an election was trying to look for reasons other than themselves about why they might have lost that election. Essentially kind of insinuating move on. How do you respond to that?
I have moved on. I'm very happy in the private sector, but I have a little more faith and belief in Canadians than I think the Prime Minister does. I think people want a bright light shone on this. They don't want a foreign actor, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, interfering with our fundamental rights. And the most fundamental is our right to vote. And a lot of Canadians, especially in diaspora communities, come here for that right, Vassy. So if we know, and the Prime Minister knows from his briefings that we've read in the Globe and Mail, that there are foreign interference efforts, I would hope he would agree with me that the inquiry should make some recommendations to prevent this next time. And if he doesn't believe the same view I had, he should explain to people why he doesn't feel that way.
Do you think, based on the level of scrutiny right now and the fact that this inquiry is taking place, that this can be avoided next time? Like, do you think something like what happened in 2021 would go unreported, not conveyed to the public again?
I don't think so, and I think you're going to see a flip where they're not going to say before a public warning goes out, every riding has to be infected. I think they will say we need to warn people when we know there's active campaigns. What I had hoped would happen during the election was a very narrow warning to people just using foreign language platforms like WeChat. There should have been a warning to say, hey, if you get your news from this source, don't trust it because it comes from a foreign actor. I think that would have been a modest message that would have helped some Canadians make the right decision. They didn't feel that it reached the threshold, and I think that was a mistake. I also think we weren't ready as a country for the level and degree of this sort of interference. So let's look at this as a kind of a wake-up call. I've always said, let's make this nonpartisan. Let's let Justice Hogue do her job and hopefully incorporate her recommendations, both at the House of Commons level, but also at the party level, like nominations. The people in decisions around nominations, whether it's party leader or the party officials, if CSIS has a file on someone, I think the parties want to know that before they potentially get elected to the House of Commons. So how do we do this in a way that's responsible? I think all parties should try and take this seriously, and that's why I've tried to take the politics out of it, and I hope the Prime Minister tries to do that too.
I'll leave it on that note. Mr. O'Toole, thank you very much.
Thank you.